Katrina Broden. I'm one of the trustees of the CILIPS board, and it's my pleasure this morning to chair this session with SarahLouise McDonald. We're going to hear from Sarah on the topic of All Librarians are Teaching Librarians. SarahLouise works as an academic support librarian at the University of Edinburgh, currently supporting the School of Law and the Centre for Open Learning. She's passionate about critical information literacy for all and using our librarians' superpowers for good, which includes encouraging fellow library professionals to feel confident in the work that they do. SarahLouise has worked in a variety of sectors since she began in libraries and considers herself an enthusiastic dabbler in many areas of the profession. She's also the worthy recipient of Scotland's Library and Information Professional of the Year 2022 at last year's CILIP conference. SarahLouise will be looking at her experience of working in multiple library sectors, public libraries, business information, schools, colleges, universities and specialist law libraries, and how the work she does now when teaching in a classroom is very similar to the work she did in other jobs and user-facing roles. The session is in partnership with the Academic and Research Library Group Scotland. This group aims to provide a focus and forum for the professional concerns and interests of everyone working in further and higher education or research libraries in Scotland. You can find out more information about them on the CILIPS website and including how to join the committee. So I'm just going to hand over to SarahLouise. Welcome.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for coming along today to hear me speak about how I believe that all librarians are teaching librarians, if they want to be. And you'll see I've caveated that on my first slide here, because there will be librarians who do not feel that they teach and are very happy not to be teachers. And possibly this session might not be for them, and that's okay. But the people that I'm delivering this session for are the people that I've encountered in the last few years who speak to me about wanting to do more teaching and don't feel that they have that experience. I'll talk you through a little bit about that in a second. So here's what we're going to be looking at today. I'm going to do a short introduction as to why I'm standing here in the first place. We're going to look very, very briefly at some literature about pedagogy. I'm going to provide 5 statements, and I thought about calling this 5 top tips, but I feel like everyone does 5 top tips. So let's just call it 5 statements about teaching as a librarian, things that I've learned that people may be interested in hearing. I'm going to show you some lesson plans because I sometimes think that's a really valuable thing you can take away from hearing someone speak. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get the best experience, how to increase your own experience and how to use the networks around you. And then I'm just going to have some final thoughts just towards the end of the session. Ideally, we will have some time for questions at the end, but if we don't, then please do find me because I'm here all day and happy to chat to people afterwards. So, an introduction, as if that wasn't one. Hello, this is me. My name's SarahLouise, as you've heard. I currently work at the University of Edinburgh as an academic support librarian, but I do have experience in quite a few different sectors, and I'm delighted to see so many colleagues from these sectors here today. I nearly added that I was also the assistant manager of a local yarn store in Glasgow to the bottom of this, because actually surprisingly similar to librarianship, but I didn't include that. Just thought I'd tell you about it instead. And here's the main reasons that I believe I'm here today. First of all, I wanted to clarify why me. Why am I standing here? I do have a teaching qualification now, which I gained in the last few years, and it's because of that that I feel this is something that we're missing in our profession. We don't talk enough about the teaching that we do as teaching, and we often talk about it as training. And I found this very frustrating. I mentioned that I've had contact with other professionals recently who did not feel that their skills were up to par, and I'm standing there in these meetings saying, yes, they are, you do this, you have the transferable skills, you just don't call it that. So that's one of the things I wanted to get across today. There's advocacy for our roles to be done. I think as librarians, we do a terrible job of talking about the great work we do. And this has been the case when I've been on the picket line recently. I'm a member of UCU, my university union. Thank you. And when I'm talking to my academic colleagues, they sometimes don't realise that we do teaching too. And if people in my own institution don't know that, then we have a problem. And also, I won an award here last year, and it was lovely. But that really came with a lot of emotional reflection in terms of my own imposter syndrome and why did I win the award? Who thinks I'm, why was I chosen and not the other excellent candidates? And some of that is me recognising, actually, if I'm telling other people you have the skills, then I too have the skills. So here we are. And why now? I've outlined some of these things already, but essentially getting my teaching qualification, I realised a lot of the work I was already doing was teaching. Talking to other people, I realised a lot of the work they were doing was teaching. I have a few mentees or former chartership candidates, one of whom is in the room. Very proud of them, well done. And these people have all said, oh, I don't know if I have that skill set. Yes, you do. I've also been on recruitment panels recently, and similar problems have occurred. There are a few things I want you to take away from the session today. So I do think that most library jobs contain some type of teaching. We sometimes call it training, but it's teaching. I think recognising that it's teaching is key to expanding that experience and being good at it. And I think sharing experiences, very important, and you are already doing it, as I keep saying. So let's look very briefly at some pedagogy. This is a big long quote, which I will not read out. I hope that you will perhaps look at these slides later if you don't have time to read this right now. This is all about what identifies a teaching librarian. And this is from a wonderful book called The Academic Teaching Librarians Handbook, published in 2021 by Claire McGuinness. I highly recommend, I will talk about it in a minute, that you get your hands on a copy, have a read, beg, borrow, steal, maybe not steal, borrow from a library, a copy of this book. I have access to it through work, but I also have my own copy because it's so good and I have post-it notes in it. And one of the things that McGuinness talks about here is about what I've just mentioned. If you identify that you have this skill, then you can increase the skill, you can expand upon it. And that's the very base level that I would like you to take away today. So we're going to do a little poll, and this is where I hope my technology is up to scratch. I would like you to either scan the QR code or go to menti.com on any device you have available and enter this number, 13298208. And I'm going to bring up a slide that I hope will show the results live. So we could full screen this, but I'm just pleased that it's working at all so far. I've asked you here in your post, current or previous, does your job description contain one of these terms? And this is sort of just a bit of research for me actually to see how people's job descriptions can be a bit wibbly wobbly. But it's interesting to me to see whether our organisations recognise what we do. Okay, just letting people get their votes in, and then I'm going to move to the next slide. Oh, lovely. You should now have an option on your device to answer this question. In your post, current or previous, do you feel you do teaching or training? I love the first one was neither. That's fine. You're welcome here too. Lots of people saying training. That's what I thought would happen. Glad I'm not entirely off base. Good. Okay, well that's settled down a bit. That's interesting to me. I think a lot of people find that they feel they're doing training because they don't realise that training and teaching are so similar. Sometimes the difference is a few spine points on the grade scale of your organisation. Funny that. I'm just going to pop my other slides back on. Success. Okie dokie. So when we talk about teaching then, what is the difference from training? And I've just cited a few things here. I've talked about the SCONAL standards and ACRL standards and also local standards. So this might be what's required of you by your institution. This might be something that you are, if you're in a university like I am, your students might need to meet a certain framework of information literacy provision. I'm thinking particularly with the School of Law, we have standards that we have to meet. But what you will notice if you go and look at these frameworks is that they are just that, frameworks. And in fact, in recent years, they've often been broadened out, so they're actually more like core concepts now. So it's not that you need to teach a certain lesson plan. It's not that you need to equip people with one specific ability. It's that they need to understand a whole range of things. They need to understand like threshold concepts of what, how to search and how to find information and how to apply that information. So the fact that these bodies have gone, we actually can't prescribe exactly what teaching is. Teaching is a whole range of things. Should be a message that you take away with you and go, actually, if these definitions... Okay, that's fine, so it wasn't me setting something up. If these organisations are unable to define it more clearly, then you shouldn't feel bad about the fact that you don't know if what you're doing is training or teaching. These are something called ABC cards, and it's something that I learned about recently when I did my, I was running an online course. I was planning and running an online course, and the learning developers were talking to us about these cards, and I thought, oh, that's such a useful tool, why don't we use that? And honestly, it's just that no one ever tells you. There are tools out there, and these are freely available. These are Creative Commons licensed, so they are open resources that can help you look at what you're doing and plot it as a teaching exercise. So I do encourage you to look at this website later. It's called ABC Learning Design, and these cards and resources are all available. They give you definitions for what teaching activities might be and how you can use them and plan them together into a course. I'm nearly at the end of pedagogy now, you'll be glad to hear. I just want to shout out a few key resources that I find very helpful. Now they are slightly academic librarian focused because that's where I am right now and that's what I've been studying. But I actually think just like we have transferable skills, a lot of the scenarios talked about in these are transferable to other sectors. So I would highly recommend, as I mentioned, Claire McGuinness' book, also Elizabeth Brookbank and Jess Hayes' book is wonderful. That's openly available online as well. And there's a website there called the Teaching Perception Inventory, which was great in terms of working out what my own teaching identity was. It's a free resource available online, so do give it a go. Okay, that was the sort of meaty bit. Now I'm going to talk about 5 things about teaching that I know that maybe you would like to know also. The first one is identify learning outcomes. If you're not sure if the thing that you're doing is teaching, think about what you want the person to walk away with. That is a learning outcome. It doesn't need to be more complex than that. It's important that you can explain what you're teaching someone or that you're showing them so that your stakeholders know about this, so that your managers know that what you're doing is teaching, but also so that the person is clear about what they're walking away with. Timing is key, she says, checking her phone. Oh, we're okay. Knowing how long you have in a session. And I'm going to show you some of my lesson plans in a minute, and you'll see I've chunked things by time often. And it's because I think it's really important to make sure that you've planned the session in such a way that you give people time to absorb what you're putting out there. And I don't know is a valid response. Telling someone I don't know and saying, shall we look it up together, or I'll get back to you on that, is not a failing on your part. It's not failing to prepare. It's simply showing people that the thing they're doing might be complex, and that's okay. That's very relatable, and the people in your audience might thank you for it. I've found a lot more friendly behaviour from learners when I've said to them, I actually don't know that, that's a really good question. And I think we shouldn't be ashamed of not knowing. Nobody has to see your notes, apart from the ones I'm going to show you. So if your scribbly notes are insert bit here, look up research, that's okay. You will, hopefully, pad that out later, but it's okay that you don't know everything when you're planning ahead. Unless you are showing someone your notes, and then you can tidy them up, it's fine. And it's okay not to be able to help everyone all the time. Today, I mentioned this at the beginning, that this might not be the session for you. This might be you coming along going, I'm not a teaching librarian, no way, this isn't for me. I'm like, well, that's fine. These are my thoughts on it, and it's okay if you don't agree, and it's okay if you don't get out of the session what I want to give you. Maybe I'll have a better session for you next time. I don't know, if you tell me about it. Who knows? So a quick look at some lesson plans then, and you will not be able to read these on the screen. They are quite far away, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to make the slides available afterwards. That's usually what happens. So you can look at these in more detail. And also, if you would like the actual documents that I have, I'm more than happy to send them on to people. My email address is at the end. So this is a lesson plan I did for our online course that we delivered last year for credit. Yes, which is great. And what I've done here is, as I mentioned, I've divided things up in terms of, I tend to chunk it by time. Some features, what I've done here, I was sharing this note with colleagues because we all had a different module to run, and so I thought if I put my example out there, they can build on it if they want to. So I made sure to include a description of how I'm running the session, any tech requirements or programs, so I've mentioned Blackboard Collaborate there because that's what we use frequently. How and why I've planned it this way. I almost always bookend my sessions with 5 minutes at the start and at the end because you just never know who's having tech difficulties getting in or out if you're running it online or literally walking into the room. So it's nice to have a buffer. Breakup sections with activities. So the ABC cards earlier, they showed that there were some things that were more passive and there were some things that were more interactive. And similar to me putting a Mentimeter poll there, it just means people aren't sitting listening to you for 40 minutes, 50 minutes at a time. And also follow the discussions with a demo. That's what I've done here. Demos are hard. And if you are a person that has to do demos, live demos of a resource, pretty much guaranteed it's not going to work at least 50% of the time. That's okay. That's, again, not a feeling of you. That's just the way the world works. So make it as easy as possible for yourself. Have a backup activity if you can. If you don't have, if you're not convinced it's going to work, maybe have some screenshots so you can still point out key parts of the resource, something like that. Or genuinely just be ready to switch to questions and answers. If the demo doesn't work, that's okay. I tend to put demos at the end for that reason. Here's my lesson plan for this session. As you can see, spider diagram, I love them. I think they're some of the best things you can do is just start writing and just say, oh, here's some ideas, and then you pick out the best ones later. Normally people don't see this, so great. I recommend a 10-minute free write. I do this with poetry when I'm writing poetry, as you just kind of write for 10 minutes and you just don't take your pen off the page and then hopefully something good comes out of it. It might just be one line, a couple of words, that's okay. Include things you already know and things you don't, such as insert research here. And think about why your users are there. So I was trying to work out why you guys were coming to see me, to be quite honest. And I thought, oh, sometimes the things I like to see in conferences is like takeaways or examples of people's work. So I thought, here are examples of my work. I've also got some examples of online resources. And I will say that these are more relevant to my job at the moment in terms of they are from an academic library. You in a public library, in a school library, and any other service may not have access to these things. But some of these are freely available online. And some of them are things like blogs. A blog post can still be a teaching resource. If the platform allows, you maybe don't need to plan it as much. You can just throw stuff out there, move it around later. That's perfectly suitable. Maybe you don't have a plan. Remember your audience, as I mentioned, what are they coming for? And think about how impatient people are. Group things by theme, if you can. Reduce clicks if it's an online resource. And consider the accessibility of the platform you're using. So some of the things I have here are not terribly accessible. Prezi's a platform that isn't terribly accessible because it's quite static in terms of the background images and the contrast and things. You can't alter a lot of that. So I have that available as a really plain looking PowerPoint with high contrast. And I also have all the content as a Word document so that if anyone does want it, they can just let me know. And all my contact details are in there. So I have a section for alternative formats and things. So just think about those types of things when you're planning your resources. Stalls and promotion are something we all do, almost all of us do, and they are an opportunity for teaching too. You might think that two-minute interaction you have with someone is not teaching, but they are coming to you and they leave with more information than they came with. So that's teaching. I've made a note of some things that work and some things that do not work. Essentially, the shorter you can make an interaction in terms of what's required of the user, the better. If you're at this particular stall, I had pieces of paper laid out, so I was hoping people would like construct a Boolean search. Absolutely did not work. The best thing that worked was, can you put sticky dots on which of these resources is a DVD on a reading list, and that kind of thing. So low intensity interactions at this type of event is what I would recommend. But you still need to do the same level of planning as you do for a 40-minute session in front of a classroom. So think of it as teaching, it is teaching. And I have said at the bottom there, don't give yourself a hard time if it's not busy, or if people really want to go to the clicky pen stall. There's always a clicky pen stall. That's not on you, that's okay. They have money, libraries don't have money, it's fine. There are some lessons that are roaming the library lessons, and these are good for in-person, they are good in school libraries, they are good in public libraries. You know, if I was to do this lesson plan again, I would maybe do it differently. It's not very high contrast, it's not very accessible, I've not used great fonts, there's a lot of text squished down. But this was introductory slides, and I also gave the students a handout that just had everything in plain text. So you can make things more accessible, even if you start off not with everyone in mind. And if you think that's only applicable to school libraries, no it isn't. I do this with university libraries, I've done this with public libraries, I do this with transition students, I do this in person, I do this online. One of these slides here, the one that says memory test, that's a treasure hunt for the things I've already said in my presentation. They just have to recall and interact with the text box a bit. It's the same skills, it's the same recall, it's the same analysing the information that you've given them, looking around, thinking about what everyone else in their community is doing. That's still skills that you're imparting to them. So, just going to check my time again. We're okay. I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about an activity you currently do, and think about whether it's teaching or not. Think about your learning outcomes. Think about how your audience impacts the way you deliver it. Given the time or space you have available, how would you divide it up? Would you chunk it by time? Would you chunk it by location? Would you do something online? And having seen examples of what I consider teaching, i.e. everything, is there anything at your job that you wouldn't have classed as teaching before, but you do now? So that's a load of things to think about. You're welcome to talk amongst yourselves. You're also welcome to do this work on your own, because sometimes group work is the worst thing in this environment. So I'm going to put a timer up, and I'll give you about a 1 minute warning, and then we'll come back together.
I don't think I've done well on my
Okay folks, that's us, just finished our 5 minutes. I hope that was a useful period of reflection or chat. I'm just going to move back to my other slides, and then I'll be right back with you. Hurrah. Okie dokie. So I'm not going to ask you to feedback, because I also think that's an incredible waste of our time, to be honest. But if you have discovered anything that was really meaningful to you, I'd love to hear it later after the session. So just before I wrap up, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get more experience as a person who teaches in libraries. And honestly, the answer is everywhere. My networks are varied, and they are, some are logical places, some are less logical. So there's obviously my own workplace. I've got my own bosses, I've got my team. I would say I really, we were just discussing actually the difference between People are very focused on qualifications in librarianship, and people feel, oh, I'm not a librarian if I don't have a piece of paper that says I did a library course. Not true. I am not a teacher if I don't have a teaching qualification. Not true. And I can say that as someone who has both of those pieces of paper. It changed my job not a jot. I was already doing the work. It can be a useful foot in the door, I would say. That's great. But a lot of what I learned about being a librarian, I learned from library assistants. So I often use the term librarian and library worker interchangeably, because I think we need to recognise that there's a lot that comes from people who've taken a vocational path. That was a lot about library assistants and my own politics. But anyway, I also learn from students, I learn from academic colleagues. I have external contacts, so I am a mentor, I have my own mentors, I have mentees. Things like this conference are wonderful for getting in touch with people professionally. There's organisations like CILIPS, of course. SLLG is the Scottish Law Librarians group, which is a wonderful group, well, I'm currently the convener, so of course I have to say that. But there's journals, there's blogs. That's how I found some of the resources that we're already talking about. I'll tell anyone that moves about the Academic Teaching Librarians Handbook. There's other allies. There's trade unions. That's really helpful. If you are not a member of a union, join a union. Non-work hobbies and groups. I used to do roller derby, and there's a huge amount of library staff in roller derby. Also, I knit. A lot of librarians are knitters, and so you can make contacts in all these areas, sometimes in the most unexpected places. And all of these people have influenced the teacher I am today. And if you're bold enough, I've said, people will come to you. Here's the lovely happy faces of some of these many people that I've just spoken about, some of whom are in the room today. Bonus points if you can spot one. Some of these were my colleagues from when I worked in school libraries, or the Sheriff and Supreme Court's libraries. One of these photos is my current team. One of them is my best friend, who happens to also be a librarian. And interestingly, she is a person who has a PhD in library-related area, and didn't consider herself a proper librarian for a very long time. And I'm saying, but you're doing all the things. But I don't have this job title. And I said, well, you're still working in libraries, you're still doing the job. So don't be too worried about the titles. Find your resources where you can, find your people. And I think one of the things we should rely on more is each other. So that's a great way to get more, understand more about teaching. You've come to this session today and I've talked to you about my lesson plans, but speak to your colleagues. They'll also be teaching, and maybe they don't realise it either. So, I am on my wrap-up slides now. This is a big long quote, again, which I, again, will not read out. But this is from part of my assessment when I submitted for my teaching qualification. And I was reflecting on what it is to be a teacher. And I say, I didn't consider myself a teacher. I was a librarian, sometimes did a bit of training. But now, looking at what the requirements were for this teaching qualification, I already ticked the boxes. I just had to think about it a little bit. So I would encourage you to reflect. If you take nothing else away from today, reflect on the work you're already doing and see how it should be recognised, and how it does impact yourself, the work you do, and the other people around you. I've said at the bottom there that if I continue in this path, then I could go in any direction from here, and I think that's true. And I think it's worth remembering that it can feel very limiting in some of our organisations that we don't know where we're heading next. Maybe we're restricted by the level of our salary or the level of our organisational structure, but there will be opportunities, you just have to make the most of them. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was allowed to do this talk at this particular conference, looking to the future. So, there are my contact details. I really do hope some of you get in touch following this. We might have a minute or two for questions.
Yeah, we do. We'll just open up, we've got a few minutes for questions, maybe take one or two.
And if you have none, that's fine.
I'm going to let them warm up. I have one.
Oh.
And I really enjoyed that. I thought it was excellent, so thank you very much. I think we all did. When you were going through the lesson plans and approaches to providing content that way, it made me think a lot about what happens in the public library sector where I work. But I just wondered if you had any thoughts or reflections on the learner's voice or user feedback and how that might inform your practice as a teaching librarian.
Absolutely. I think it's really important that we recognise there's often a difference between the learning outcomes we want for our students and what they want from the session that they're attending. They're often very different. Thank you. That was my stop talking now reminder, so all good. I think that feedback from learners or users is incredibly important, and I think we need to give them more opportunity to do that. So the activities that you build into your teaching, when I had a little poll there, it's very gratifying that you all confirmed a lot of the things I'd already thought you were going to say, but small opportunities for feedback like that can be really helpful because you do begin to understand if you're being effective as a teacher. Because if they're not picking up what you're putting down, then you need to alter what you're saying. And also if they're not interested in what you're putting down, you probably still need to alter what you're saying. So I think it's really important to think about the user at the end of this and what they intend to get out of it, just as much as what you want them to get.
Thank you. And do we have a question from the floor? We've got one at the back. I knew there would be one.
At the back too.
Hiya, I'm going to ask a question which is about, I'm an academic and I engage with librarians, so I wondered what advice you had about building that relationship with the other folks that are doing teaching at the university and making sure that it's mutually respectful, and how do you manage to get the most out of academics, and how can we better engage with teaching librarians to get the best out of you?
Oh, that's such a nice question. I think my best advice is honestly be approachable and friendly. I think it requires legwork on both sides, honestly. I think from my perspective, I try to understand what it is this person is doing. I also really respect their workload and try not to give them extra jobs that are unnecessary. If someone has asked me for a piece of research, and I could just say to them, oh, you go here, and here's how you find it. Or if it's one thing that I know they need urgently, then I'm going to just give it to them. So it's a bit of push and pull. And I would say what's really important to me as a professional is being treated as a professional and not, like our job is supportive, but it's not in service to. So I think there's a balance to be struck there. But it does come from both sides. So it's important that we respect other people's time and energy just as much as they respect ours. And go for a coffee, really.
Always helps. I think just based on the next session we'll probably wrap there, but SarahLouise says she's available for questions and chat over lunchtime, so please do seek her out. I think she's happy to spend time. The next session, and here's the president's past. We've got two in the room that I can see, so change seat, move around, and please join me in thanking SarahLouise.